Welcome, everyone, to the 29th episode of the Vertical Church Podcast. We just started a series titled Win the Day, and today we talked about how contentment can be contested. And so, Phil, if you can, just lay the groundwork for us.
Yeah, so this idea was kind of birthed out of Philippians 4, and I just thought about, when you and I, our head hits the pillow. I don't know, maybe you're like me, maybe you have lots of thoughts, maybe you have no thoughts. But I sometimes go, was this a good day? Mm-hmm. And then I start thinking, how do I actually define a good day? What measurements do I use? What, formula am I coming up with to decide if it's a good day or not? It's did I have my favorite food, or did I see my favorite people, or did I, get to do things I enjoy? What defines a good day? And then I, started thinking about it a lot in the idea of how I play sports is, did I win the day?
Right.
And then, obviously, being someone trying to follow Jesus, I go, what does the Bible actually say about that? What does the Bible say about when my head hits the pillow? What defines winning the day or not? Mm. And so the first thing I really was kind of praying through, really felt like the Lord was kind of leading toward Philippians 4. And in Philippians 4, 11, 12, and particularly 13, Paul's kind of talking about, I've learned the secret to being content. And I go, man, I don't know that was the word I was thinking of when I'm, feeling led to do a series, Win the Day, and then Jesus, the thing you're talking about is being content. How do those two things exist? Because I think in America, when we talk about being content, we, maybe go, man, that sounds lazy. Mm-hmm. There's no such thing as being content. You get up, you grind, you push, you become the best.
Right.
We don't use the word content as a positive thing a lot of times, but Paul says it was important for our spiritual growth. And Paul would say it's important if you want to win the day. If you want to have a good day, he goes, you need to be content. Mm. And so that was also, where Philippians 4:13 was birthed out of, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. That really was birthed out of explaining how do you be content. And in Paul's saying it's not anything external at all. He's like, I've learned to be content whether I've got a lot or little, whether I'm well-fed or hungry, I'm content. External things don't matter when it comes to my contentment because internally I can find strength through Jesus. And so that's kind of where this message was birthed out of, this idea of winning the day. We have to have clear standards of what that looks like.
Yeah, I think there's a huge temptation to, when I hear the word win, I think of a prize or an achievement or something for me because I won. And with contentment, your boss doesn't come into your office and say, or gather everyone together and say, hey, we're going to have a meeting. And he pulls up a chart and he's like, our numbers are going great, but I just want you guys to be content where you're at for the rest of the year.
Right.
And it's so counterintuitive because your boss is going to come in and say, we need to win against our competition. And so that play between work and the way the world that we live in, and looking at how we are to follow Jesus, and we win by being content. And you talk about learning to be content, it's a process. And you spoke a little bit about the story in Acts with Paul and Silas.
Yeah, so Philippians 4 historically we think was written around 60 AD, and then we brought in Acts 16, which we think historically was written somewhere around 50 AD. So we think that there's roughly 10 years between what happens in Acts 16 and Philippians 4.
Right.
And Paul said this thing, I've learned the secret to being content. Not I was taught or anything. He goes, I've learned it. Mm-hmm. And we go, well, how did you learn it? Do you have any credibility of what you're saying? If you go back to Acts 16, what happens is, through some stuff happening, a crowd gets angry at Paul and Silas. They strip them, beat them with rods, and severely flog them. Mm-hmm. And so that's the kind of guy who goes, I've learned what it's to be content. And, you think about what happens to him 10 years earlier. I don't know that he would go, I'm learning how to be content right now. But when you read Philippians 4 and then you see what happens in Acts 16, you go, no, he ends up learning. That was a learning moment for him. Because what ends up happening is after they've been beaten with rods, flogged, thrown in the inner cell, it says, around midnight they're singing and praying. And you go, man, you've had a bad day. Mm-hmm. I don't think any of us go, man, I won the day after I've been beaten with rods and severely flogged. Like, that's not a, quote, win the day in our mentality. Mm-hmm. At least it's not for me. And Paul goes, no, Philip, like I've learned the secret of being content, and even if all that happens to me, like it actually doesn't affect my contentment with at all. And when we let that sink in, we go, well, then Philippians 4:13 looks a little differently when you read Acts 16. He goes, I can do all things through Christ. You beat me with the rods, you severely flog me, you throw me in a cell where I'm in so much pain I probably can't even fall asleep, I can't lay down on the ground. I can do all things through Christ. And then that verse begins to look differently. Then we go,
Right.
hey, let's say this before we play our football game, or we go try to close this business deal.
Right.
That really wasn't what Paul was getting at. He's like, no, like I'm trying to explain to you after everything I've been through, this is how you become content. And it really started making me think, man, I don't know that winning the day or being content, I don't know it's like this standard or like target that we're trying to hit or something we're trying to obtain. I think it's a relationship we're supposed to try to protect. Like if really contentment comes from I can do all things through Christ because he's with me, then it's really about protecting our relationship with Jesus.
I love that so much. And that goes right against like our temptation to try to achieve. And that's why Jesus came in the first place, is because the Israelites were trying to keep up a law that they couldn't keep up with.
Yep.
And so then Jesus goes, no, I'm here to be with you. And like you're going to fail and I'm going to be the sacrifice for that. And now, like fast forward to like where we are today, if we're find ourselves in a place where we're trying to achieve like grace or perfection or holiness or righteousness, you can't without Jesus. And I've tried, and I know we've all tried, but we just fall short. And so like having Jesus there in this relationship, this marriage between Christ and his bride, which is us, like maybe finding contentment isn't achieving holiness by like keeping up with a set of laws, but it's actually like looking to Jesus right here next to you and saying, you're enough, and that kind of moves into like the next point about solitude. You kind of spoke a little bit about that, and I was just thinking, man, like how much time am I spending in solitude, like in a quiet space, like pursuing Jesus and communicating with him. And the song that we sang today was Breathe by Influence Music, I think. And one of the lines says, in the stillness, I can hear you whisper. And I was like, man, like how hard is it for us to get still in today's world? Like, are we doing that? Are we running as fast as we can and giving Jesus just a few minutes on the side or in the morning, like wake up, have 15 minutes of quiet time, and then like, boom, we're out the door, like rushing all day, getting our task done. But is there a space where we sit still and like listen for a whisper? Because Jesus is not the guy with the sandwich board on the sidewalk, like the world is ending. He's not going to scream at you. You're going to have to sit down and respect his whisper and listen for it.
Yeah, and that kind of goes after one of the questions that we were asking in this sermon was, do we think Jesus is enough? Like, genuinely, do we think Jesus is enough? Because in the society we live in, everything marketing-wise is trying to consciously and subconsciously tell you, me, everyone, you are this product away from happiness. You're this amount of money, or product, or house, or even things that we try to use to find contentment, like alcohol or sex or pornography or money or gluttony, or like all these things we're trying to tell ourselves, man, this can fill my emptiness. This can fulfill me. And then what we end up trying to what we end up thinking, whether we realize or not, is it's Jesus plus something is enough. And Jesus goes, no, that's not what I said. I said I am enough. And if we're not careful, we let, marketing and society and pressure all just kind of push us and believe this lie that we need to add something else to Jesus. And I think the enemy rejoices when we don't have solitude.
Absolutely.
I think what you brought up is so important, because I think that's things Jesus would tell us personally. Like, you don't even have to hear that on a podcast to think about it. But you and I don't slow down sometimes enough. to have that moment of solitude. And, maybe the listener's a little bit like me, and it's because we don't do well being alone. Like me being alone is not where I think like I'm the strongest or I'm the healthiest or anything like that. Like I like being in community. And so maybe if you're the listener, right, like me, maybe you go, man, I don't equate being alone as healthy. So what would you say back to someone like, me or the listener right now that's kind of thinking that?
Yeah, my first thought is like, I'm not suggesting that we like you move out of the house and move into the shed out back and like reduce all communication to nothing with outside sources in your community. But like, I think that if we look at scripture and the way that Jesus lived his life, he's always getting away up into the mountains on the hill to spend time with the Lord. And that's so vital to like our relationship with God and knowing Jesus. And, Ephesians talks about like his roots or our roots will grow down into him. And as we trust in him, as we spend time with him, and we'll begin to look more like him, which is the goal of this whole relationship anyway. It's like we want to look more like Jesus. But yeah, and like then again, if you're afraid of being alone, that's okay. But in those spaces, like if you invite Jesus into that space, like he's faithful to reveal himself. Like that's the whole reason I came to the faith in the first place, is because I asked God to show himself to me. And he sent a random stranger across the room, and the guy tapped me on the shoulder, and he was like, God just told me to come speak to you, and I don't know why. And immediately, just like waterworks started happening, and then that triggered the rest of my story. But like God is faithful to reveal himself. So if you do find yourself in a place where you're like, I just don't want to be by myself, I'm not asking you to move into the shed. I'm just saying like it could be beneficial to find some margin in your tight schedule. And maybe cut away some things, to have that space.
Well, I think I agree with you that the solitude is really where a battle can be waged to decide, is Jesus enough? Like in the solitude where it's just you, your thoughts, and Jesus, is that enough to be content? And if the answer is no, then you got some real wrestling to do with why. Like, what are you telling yourself you need? Like, is it community? Is it that significant other? Like, I think about some of the stages of life like I've been through, is like where watching like my friends get married or date or this or that, and like going, man, like, I think my life would be happier like if I had that significant other. Or, watching maybe other people get nicer things than I do. And maybe like if I had money like that, maybe I'd be happier. Or seeing people have different careers or this or that, or like whatever it is. I think I'd be happier.
Yeah.
You see it even in Psalms, where even people writing in Psalms are like, man, I watched the wicked succeed. Like, I don't know if you or anyone else has ever just thought about, man, like I look at some people and I'm like, man, the way they're living their life doesn't seem to be what the Bible calls us to, but they seem to be winning. Yeah. They seem to be getting ahead. They seem to be getting things. And Paul goes, none of that matters when it comes to contentment. You're looking at the wrong stuff, because it's not something to be obtained. It's a relationship to protect. And so I would encourage people, the solitude is a place where like our worst can come out or our best can be birthed. And so I would really encourage people, if you rest with me, like, man, like I don't know that alone is really a good idea. Like, you don't always have to be, quote, alone when you're alone. Like maybe, reach out to someone you really trust. You're like, hey, like I'm going to go take a hike today, and I'm just going to try to spend time on my own and just follow me and see how it went. And then invite Jesus, like you said, like invite Jesus, like, hey, I'm going on this walk and I feel really alone, like, and I need you to meet me in this moment. Yeah. So that'd be some things I suggest, like if someone's kind of wired a little bit like me, like where the idea of like alone is not where we run to think, man, something good is going to come out of this.
Yeah, I love what you said about it can be, where the best comes out of you or the worst comes out of you, and I think both happen. Like it's usually going to be the hard stuff first. I was listening to a podcast, and a guy was saying every year he spends a week or two out in the wilderness by himself. And he said it takes 3 or 4 days before he can even get quiet on the inside, because his engine has been roaring for the past year and it's still hot for a couple days, And so we live in a world where we're just 100 miles an hour, as efficient and as fast as possible all the time. And it's really important to make that margin if you don't have it already. But I think another thing the enemy likes to do is say, okay, yes, you're producing at such a high rate and like providing for your family, and that is a virtue of the faith. That is a tenet of the faith, and and that's a good thing. So keep doing that 80 hours a week, and don't worry about solitude and the health of your soul, because you're doing what you're supposed to as a husband or wife. And but I think in those moments, like we're tempted to just push down our issues and just work our butt off, and then we don't have to deal with what's going on the inside. And so in that space of solitude, like you have to sit down and listen to what's going on the inside. Like the guy was saying, it takes a few days for his mind to even get quiet while he's out there in the wilderness. So I think it's a big temptation to just self-medicate with work or whatever it may be. And that can be the hardest thing for me. It's like if I go hunting or something, my mind is just like 100 miles an hour the whole time. Like I'm having all these thoughts, and I have to invite Jesus into those agreements and things that I'm working through.
I think it's entirely possible for so many of us to be living life while our soul is dying, and I think it's entirely possible for us to get very ahead in American standards while being on our deathbed with our soul. I don't think those two things run together. I think they can even run apart sometimes if we're not careful. And I've gone to counseling several times over life for different things, and one of the things that they really taught was mindfulness. And the counselors tell me like the average human being has, I think, 10,000 thoughts a day. Like where we as humans think we have so many thoughts that our mind can't register them all, because they just can't. It can't think through all of that.
Yeah.
And so that's where the practice of like being mindful comes in, of like just going like, I can look and see 5 things. I can reach out and touch 4 things. I can smell 3 things. Like it helps ground you in the moment. I've talked about that a little bit in sermons, but it's this idea that, if we're not careful, our thoughts can just absolutely overload us, and it's not healthy. And that mindfulness idea is becoming quiet. And they're not even basically saying that's necessarily like a Christian practice, but I go, man, like, I think that is so healthy, but we should take it one step further. Don't become just grounded in the moment. Don't become just, quiet in the moment. Listen in that moment. Like, take it just one step further to be everything God designed that to be. I think those are all healthy practices, and they'll help you practically. But if you want real healing to your soul, don't just be grounded, but listen as well. And I think that's what you're trying to encourage us to do.
Yeah, absolutely. That space is just for your relationship with Jesus. If you're being mindful without inviting the Spirit, or if you're having spiritual experiences and the Holy Spirit isn't there, it's somebody else.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about this idea. It's called the Protestant work ethic. And in like 1904, this German philosopher wrote this book called The Spirit of Capitalism. And then, if you look back over our history, like the founding fathers of the country, a lot of them were Puritans, a lot of them were Christians, and they valued their chores, valued work so much. And this country has always been like, a go-getter type of country. Like if anybody can make it if you just work hard enough. And somewhere along the way, like that meshed with the faith, and it became, you are providing for your family, and that's scriptural, but it became meshed with like work and faith, and like almost became like an idol pole, like you were talking about before we started the podcast, like an idol. And so we can really, really get ourselves in trouble by like working our soul away. And I don't know, there's a ton more under that with the Protestant work ethic. And I would encourage you guys to look into that. And especially if you find yourself like, man, I don't have any space in my schedule or anything. It's really helpful to look into. So I just kind of wanted to plug that a little bit.
And we don't want everyone to get like crazy, political or anything, but like it is one of the reasons where like in my short time at Vertical, like I try to teach there's there should be a divide between country and church, and I think, some people really balk at that idea. And the reason I push so strong on that is because I think some things that are good for our country aren't necessarily good for our soul. And the reason being is like, we're talking about, for example, capitalism. Capitalism has no bearing on the gospel at all. And what I mean by that is like, if you go preach the gospel in Africa or Asia or wherever, someone can understand the gospel without understanding capitalism. And therefore, it's not intricate to the gospel. If you can go share the gospel in another country, but they don't understand how America works, you realize America is not therefore intricate to the gospel. And I'm not saying America's bad or anything like that. I'm thankful I live here. Like, I love living here. I love especially living in North Georgia. But it's not intricate for someone to understand North Georgia, for someone to understand Jesus. And that's where I try to encourage people. Like, there's a lot of good things in this world. They're just not intricate to the gospel.
Yeah.
And I think what you just pointed out was we've allowed something that's good, like the things of this country, to become wired with how we understand the gospel.
Yeah.
And it's toxic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm by no means saying that, like, running your own business is evil or like making money is bad.
Oh yeah, we definitely don't teach that here.
Right. But I think it's very easy to like let those two become one thing. Like, oh, this person is blessed because they have possessions. Like, that is a part of what I was just talking about, the Protestant work ethic. Like, it can be tempting to say, oh, well, if they've been living their life this certain way, now God has blessed them with possessions, which is actually the opposite of what the Bible says. Like, God is for the lowly and the contrite spirit, the ones who have nothing. And so, yeah, just wanted to put that out there. And like,
once what you go back to, like, lines of exactly what Paul would say is whether you have a lot or little, actually, neither's right or wrong.
Right.
Whether you've been well fed or hungry, like, neither's right or wrong when it comes to being content.
Yeah.
And he would, that's why I think they go after. That's why we teach. It's not wrong to go have a business. It's not wrong to go make money. Like, none of those things are really intricate to the gospel.
Right.
And I think sometimes we think they are, like you said, especially in America, where sometimes even the prosperity gospel kind of works its way into our thinking of, like you said, I judge other people how spiritual they are by how much they have. Go, nope, that would make no sense to someone that's living in another country, especially a third world country. Like, that doesn't line up with what the Bible actually teaches. It's just a byproduct of what we see around us, and we try to explain the gospel through what we see and touch. And so, don't let something that's a good thing become intricate to the gospel. Don't let, whether or not you own the business, or whether you have a lot or have a little, like, none of those things have a bearing on who Jesus is. And I think over time we've kind of let it slip in there because our contentment's always contested. Like, it's this idea that it's always got to be Jesus plus something else. And whether we have a large business or have nothing in business, whether we have a large family or no family, like, all of that doesn't matter when we get back to, is Jesus enough? Yes or no?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's like kind of where we want to land the plane today is, is he enough? If you died today and like you found out when you get to heaven that for the rest of eternity you're sitting in a waiting room with Jesus Christ himself, is that enough? And I may have asked that question on the podcast before, but someone asked me that one time and I was like, man, I really don't know. Like, I've been following Jesus for a couple of years, and that's just something that's kind of hard to swallow. It's like, man, have I fallen so deeply in love where just spending time with him for eternity would be enough for me? And I was like, yeah, that's something good to think about.
Or even, think about it a different way. Like, if you're having a hard time thinking about eternity, like, say that you just got, dropped off in a log cabin in the middle of nowhere with no technology, nothing, and you just got to spend the rest of your life on this side of eternity with just Jesus. Would that be a good life? Would you win in life? Yeah. And some of you who love solitude go, absolutely. Game on. But, if maybe you're more like me, like you love community and being around people, that idea, maybe you wrestle with it. Like, I'm not sure, but I think it's something we've got to look ourselves in the eye and ask, do I think Jesus is enough? Because again, I go back to if the answer is anything of Jesus plus something else, one, we don't think Jesus is enough. And two, if we don't, we'll never give our entire life to him. We'll never give our life to Jesus fully if we think we have to go find something else to find contentment and happiness.
Yeah, we're made to worship something, and like a lot of times, like I struggle with, is Jesus enough? You know, I look for contentment in other things outside of him, and so like if you're questioning that, that's okay, but he's calling us to come back to him always.
And I mean, we can go into this even deeper, but the reason that's so important is like the reason your business, whether you're successful or not, really has no bearing. Is what matters is, do you go into that situation going, Jesus is enough? Well, whether I'm, crushing it this year, Jesus is enough. And if I'm having a hard year, Jesus is enough. The reason it's so important is when you go into a dating relationship or marriage or anything, is Jesus enough? Or are you going to that person, I need something from you to be content? And then that's going to set up the relationship in such an unhealthy manner, because that person, you're asking something of them they can't give. Yeah. You're setting your significant other up to fail, or you're trying to find joy in your kids. You're setting them up to fail because you're asking of something of them that they can't offer. And that's why Jesus plus anything is ultimately always going to leave us empty, because that's not the right equation. It's either do we believe Jesus is enough or not. And so that's why, we go over these different scenarios is to kind of help us maybe see why that question is so important, because it does affect everything else. It does affect whether we can win the day or not.
Yeah. I think a good kind of last little thing, we talked about solitude a lot, and for us who don't practice it, on a regular basis, like, where do I start with that? And I think just like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, just like getting by yourself. And, if that's like when you pull up after work to your house and like sit in the car for 10 minutes and just like invite Jesus into that space in your car before you go in the house, or when you wake up, or on your lunch break, like he is dying to meet you, to like sit with you and reveal himself to you.
So it's interesting you bring that up. Like this past 2 weeks, I've been feeling like I've been challenged to start trying to be a lot earlier to places, not to just be early, but he goes, just give me that time. Like, go be early somewhere and just give me that 10 minutes, like you said. Just give that 10 minutes. I'll meet you there. And I'm like, that's interesting. I never thought about it that way.
Yeah.
It's like, go throughout your day just creating these pockets of like, it's just going to be me and Jesus for a little bit. I know I have to go to this meeting. I know I need to go meet with these people. I know I need to get these things taken care of, but like, I'm going to get these little pockets with Jesus as well, and it's going to be great. And I would encourage you that maybe you need to implement what I'm going to start implementing, and trying to get places early when I can, and just having a couple minutes with Jesus. So I think it's a great idea, Desi. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, that's a good practice too. I'm going to have to steal that.
Yeah. Go for it, man. It's something I'm going to try to implement in my life.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks so much, guys, for joining us on the podcast. And if you guys enjoy the material, share it with your friends. We're on Spotify and iTunes, anywhere you can listen to a podcast. We're on YouTube as well. That's where you're getting this video. But yeah, we appreciate you guys. And if you have questions too, or like want to ask Phil questions, you can shoot me an email. We can leave it in the show notes or something. For you guys. Yeah,
we'd love to hear from you. What even if you just don't even have a question, you just want to say something you love about the podcast, or something you'd love to see, or have any question. We'd love to hear from you. And thank you for listening. And definitely give a shout out to Caroline behind the cameras. Thank you for being here today. And shout out to Austin from Chicago,
my man,
helping us edit. We appreciate it. And we appreciate you as the listener. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.